Welcome to Cineights, where you get to know the best movies and series. Today's video is about top 20 best movies of 2021. I hope you enjoy this video. Be sure to watch until the end because I am sure you will like it. Please subscribe to the channel and like the video. Dune. From the moment you hear that opening, guttural, rumbling din possibly via your TV speakers, hopefully through a theater's huge sound system, Denis Villeneuve's long-awaited take on Frank Herbert's sci-fi magnum opus announces itself as something epic, immersive, huge. No other movie arguably made better use of its big screen canvas as part one of his two-part adaptation, turning the author's sprawling tale of warring royal houses, giant sandworms, corporate capitalism run amok, indigenous cultures, religious allegory, and hero's journey adventure into the sort of overwhelming, otherworldly experience that befits a saga. All of its size and scope, it also feels like an oddly personal movie, as if the French-Canadian filmmaker made a bespoke blockbuster. Filtered his own obsessions and visual fetishes through both the source material and vintage heavy metal magazine covers. Everyone from Timothée Chalamet to Rebecca Ferguson, Oscar Isaac to Jason Momoa, and a sterner-than-thou Charlotte Rampling to a slimy, fat-suited Stellan Skarsgård add their shades and colors to the piece. Yes, it could certainly use more Zendaya, but considering what Villeneuve has done with this initial outing, we're willing to wait for part 2 to see her get her due. The Mitchells vs. the Machines. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a 21st-century Homo sapien in possession of good fortune must be in want of dependable Wi-Fi. Take that away, and chaos reigns. Both a satire of our social dependency on tech and a surprisingly funny, tender take on dysfunctional family dynamics, this animated comedy from writer-directors Mike Rianda and Jeff Rowe is not a Luddite manifesto. Internet is where Katie Mitchell puts up the goofy short movies that get her into film school out west. Suggests turning her college move into one last Mitchell road trip. Fortunately, that's the same moment the singularity happens, and few things ruin family traveling more than an unstoppable robot army. This is not a burial, it's a resurrection. An elderly widow is preparing to meet her maker. Before shuffling off this mortal coil, however, she must stand up to local priests, politicians and other patriarchal figures who are in the process of flooding her village in the name of progress. Writer-director Lemohang Jeremiah Mosesse's film makes you feel as you're watching a fable or a myth unfold. Deftly moving from Twala's Gnostic presence, she somehow keeps the film floating along while also giving it a sense of gravitas to surreal moments of chaos, destruction and, yes, rebirth. You are never sure if the mysterious Lezaba-playing narrator is God, the devil or death himself, or whether the juke joint where he's telling his tale is heaven, hell, or purgatory. You do know that this small, determined old woman's final act of defiance is righteousness personified. Nightmare Alley, in which Guillermo del Toro takes a break from stories about beautiful monsters and gives us a straight shot of monstrous human beings with no chaser. The Shape of Water director doesn't sand the edges off of William Lindsay Gresham's infamous 1946 novel about a carny who turns a sideshow mentalist act into a nightclub sensation with his lady love. Enter a cosmopolitan psychiatrist who never met a scam she didn't like, and that whistling sound you hear is someone's already in progress moral descent gaining velocity. It's a near-perfect throwback noir, complete with weak men and femme fatales and a bushel of bad apples, although the ecosphere of grifting and con artistry also make it one of the few films to capture the Trump era in all its flim-flam. The Disciple, making good on the promise of his Autopsy of a Judicial System debut court, filmmaker Chaitanya Tamhane returns with a look at young man dedicated to playing and studying Indian classical music. What starts as a creative pursuit inherited from his father turns into an all-consuming obsession, and as the years pass, the idea that his passion may be greater than his talent starts to tear him up. An intriguing, beautifully composed character study that asks a number of questions. What happens to an artist's soul when they are incapable of becoming a master? Can you be a righteous defender of an art form and also a complete asshole? And at what point does protecting a cultural tradition start to cut off its life supply? Netflix slid this onto their streaming service like it was a dirty secret back in April, with a few limited, little-publicized screenings in theaters. Just makes us want to shout that much louder. Attention must be paid. Flea, a young boy growing up in Afghanistan in the 1980s watches as his older brother goes AWOL after being forcibly recruited by the Mujahideen to fight the Soviets. Thanks to the efforts of another sibling living abroad, the whole family is able to leave the country and eventually settle in Europe. Years later, this nameless, now-grown protagonist is a successful academic who's settled down with a supportive boyfriend. When the Danish director Jonas Poe Rasmussen asks him to recount his story for the camera, however, you can see how being uprooted from his home has never quite been resolved. The result is both an intimate exploration of trauma as well as a chronicle of the universal 20th century refugee experience. Which that word in the title is a constant way of life. The fact that Rasmussen animates this immigrant's tale somehow makes it even more graceful and gutting. There's a sequence near the end that earns the sobs it inspires precisely because of how it's presented. The Green Knight, Go Quest, Young Man. Eager to prove his potential as a knight in King Arthur's court, a 14th century gent named Gawain accepts a challenge from an ominous figure to strike him down with one blow. A sword is swung. And then Gawain is given a year before this mysteriously not dead yet stranger gets his chance to answer that strike. Hero must then seek out his nemesis and rewrite his fate. Writer-director David Lowery is no stranger to seekers, spiritual searchers or rewiring sacred mythologies, and the way he both presents the Sir Gawain and the Green Knight poem as a boy's adventure narrative and punctures the entire concept of honor and valor through violence is a woozy, wonderful thrill. Like all good medieval dramas, it has its share of hallucinogenic weirdness, talking foxes, loping giants, ghostly maidens, and ends not with a bang but with a magnificently mournful sigh. The Power of the Dog, Jane Campion's first movie in 12 years, is a western that falls somewhere between revisionist and ragingly Freudian, a tale of brothers not characterized by anything resembling brotherly love. Set in a barely tamed Montana, her adaptation of Thomas Savage's novel introduces us to the Burbanks. George is the kind, quiet type who's one polka-dotted tie away from being a dandy. Phil is his rough-and-tumble cowboy of a brother. An earthy bully who once went to an eastern college and returned to help run the family ranch. A woman enters the picture in the household, causing conflict between the siblings, so, too, does her sensitive son, who Phil takes a particular dislike to. Shots of dusty prairies and galloping herds give this an epic feel, but like so much of Campion's greatest work, it's the wild interior frontiers she's interested in exploring. While the movie is an ensemble piece, it's Cumberbatch who captures your attention as a toxic male characterized by rage and repression. Saint Maud, a born-again Christian named Maud, pines for a mission, and for her sins, she's given one, in the form of being a caretaker for a terminally ill choreographer. The longer she tends to her sick employer, the more she worries about saving this woman's soul. But is Maud capable of offering salvation to the sick? Is she imagining these conversations with God, or does this pious heroine really have a direct line to divinity? Or perhaps that voice in her head belongs to some other, less heavenly messenger. Director Rose Glass' feature debut can be savored as a welcome, disquieting new addition to that old-time religious horror canon. You can look at it as a portrait of young woman finding a warped sense of empowerment in her madness, which makes this possession twice as unnerving. No matter which way you look at it, the movie is a genuine revelation, and the sort of holy terror that restores your faith in a genre. Of Soul, If Amir, Questlove, Thompson's look back at the series of shows that took place in Harlem's Mount Morris Park in the summer of '69 had been nothing but musical performances. The fruits of his labor of love would still make for a near-peerless concert film, a 19-year-old Stevie Wonder jumping in front of his keyboard before banging out a manic drum solo. Nina Simone turning Backlash Blues into the equivalent of a boxing match. Sly and the Family Stone at their peak, reminding you that funk is both a noun and a verb. Mahalia Jackson and Mavis Staples together, taking everyone to church. What he gives us instead, however, is far more vital. It's a contextualized look at a specific moment in Harlem's history, in African American history. In American history that reminds you just how much the music acted as a salve for state-institutionalized violence, a catalyst for change, and a celebration. Licorice Pizza. Paul Thomas Anderson goes back in time, Los Angeles, San Fernando Valley, 1973, and captures a beautiful, unlikely friendship blossoming between a high school-age kid and a 20-something woman. That's the long and the short of Licorice Pizza, and when it comes to PTA making his memory piece movie, that's all you really need. It's a rom-com and a coming-of-age story set in the 70s that replicates the sort of ramblin', hangout vibe of that era's movies to a T. Vignettes collide into each other, but it's more about the vibe here than anything else that, and giving his young, first-time actors a showcase for their talents. Quo Vadis, Ida. A look back at a wartime tragedy recounted with breaking news urgency, Jasmila Zabanik's Oscar-nominated drama drops viewers into the town of Srebrenica, at the exact moment that the Bosnian Serb army's tanks are rolling down its streets. Our tour guide for this nightmare is Ida. A former teacher who now serves as an interpreter for the United Nations troops, she's trying to ensure that her family is among the thousands of Muslim citizens who will be protected by peacekeepers in the Safe Zones shelter. UN's officers are told that all residents must be transported to a new location. Ida fears the worst. Will prove her instincts are correct. Anchored by an absolutely stunning performance by Bajrovic, few actors have done more with a stressful scowl and a frozen mask of dread. This recreation of a real-life atrocity refuses to gin up a moral or a silver lining message. This is a procedural yet somehow remarkably compassionate in its storytelling. The film's gut punch of a coda reminds that even when things return to normal, time can only heal some wounds, not all. The Velvet Underground. Only Todd Haynes could have made a documentary about the Velvet Underground iconoclastic art rockers, downtown boho dark stars, the missing link between the Brill Building and Rimbaud, and turned it into something that you might have seen projected behind the band during one of Andy Warhol's exploding plastic inevitable shows. An absolute masterpiece of a music group portrait. This chronicle of the rise and flame-out fall of the VU borrows the vocabulary of that era's experimental filmmaking, complete with abstract montages and Chelsea girls split screens. More importantly, it gives you a great sense of the avant-garde environments and pop-to-pop art intersections that made the initial combination of Lou Reed and John Cale so combustible. Our talking heads interviews and archival clips galore, of course, but it's all presented in a way that frames the good, the great and the ugly of the band beautifully. Shiva baby, seriously, is there anything more nerve-wracking than running into your married sugar daddy at a Shiva for a family friend? The answer, for writer-director Emma Selleman's debut is yes, if both your noisy, overbearing parents and your ex-girlfriend are there as well. Danielle finds herself juggling a number of secrets and lies while stuck at a communal gathering, having to navigate paternal expectations, the ghosts of her past, and being publicly outed in regard to how she's paying her bills. Viewers, meanwhile, may find themselves running out of nails to bite as things continually threaten to fall apart. A colleague referred to this as uncut gems for Gen Z women, and that description couldn't feel more apt in terms of the stress levels experienced while watching it. Bad luck banging or loony porn. Memo to schoolteachers who make sex tapes with their partners in their off hours: make sure the clip doesn't end up going viral on the internet. You may get hauled before a committee of concerned citizens ready to tar and feather you. The big winner at this year's Berlin Film Festival, Romanian filmmaker Radu Jude's raunchy comedy is partially about an educator who has the misfortune of watching a private matter become the center of an extremely hypocritical public debate. It's also a portrait of a Western world on the brink, in which civility is a casualty of war and the tenuous bonds that hold society together are fraying and tearing before our eyes. And, in Bad Luck's glorious middle section, we're treated to a litany of facts, anecdotes, rants, risque asides, and less than stellar history lessons that blurs everything into a melange of sex, death, and horror. The political is personal, and vice versa. Every generation gets the WR, mysteries of the organism we deserve, and thanks to Jude, we now have ours, The Souvenir Part 2. Finally, a sequel we actually needed. Joanna Hogg's semi-autobiographical 2019 movie rewound to her film school days in early 1980s London and a relationship with a charismatic, troubled older man. Her follow-up picks up more or less where things left off and observes the director's screen counterpart, Julie, working on her thesis project, which is a film about the impact that relationship had on her. There's a slightly meta-Hall of Mirrors feeling to Hogg making a movie about her younger self making a movie about what we've seen in the first Souvenir, but it's the differences between the two that make you realize what a smart, emotionally satisfying long game she's playing here. We'll look back in anger, in sorrow, in wistfulness at a transitional moment in one artist's life. The chapter dives into how we use art to process grief. The viewing booth, Ra'anan Alexandrovich had an idea. Put out an open call to Jewish American university students, have them view a variety of news clips regarding interactions between Israeli soldiers and Palestinian citizens and interview them about their thoughts on what they see. He'd document the results on film. One participant in particular, a young woman named Maya Levy, fascinated him. Their interactions fall somewhere between conversational and combative. As we watch him watch her watching these snippets on the occupation, all of which range from highly partisan to outright propaganda, the entire notion of whether our belief systems can be changed, or are merely reinforced by the information we receive, is put through the proverbial ringer. Beginning, it opens with a 9-minute shot of a church service interrupted by a firebombing, still the most unsettling, violently shocking screen image we saw in 2021, and ends with an elliptical act of retribution straight out of the Bible. In between those two jaw-dropping sequences is one of the most audacious debuts in eons, courtesy of Georgian filmmaker Dia Kulumbegashvili. Our heroine, Yana, is a preacher's wife and part of a Jehovah's Witness congregation that resides at the base of the Caucasus Mountains. A detective from the big city who's arrived to investigate this act of religious persecution feels that he has the right to commit crimes of his own. And from there, Kulumbegashvili slowly, deceptively sets the stage for a thriller that hides its faith, hope, and desire to smite the wicked behind an austere, rigorously formalist style of filmmaking. The Human Voice, Pedro Almodovar released a feature this year, Parallel Mothers, that deftly combines a Circean maternal drama with a wallop of an indictment about Spain's inability to reckon with its past. Yet it's his short take on Jean Cocteau's 1930 monologue, in which a woman goes from grief-stricken to revenge-seeking. That's stuck with us ever since we saw this back in March, and what he and Tilda Swinton accomplish with a few sets, some show-stopping gowns, an axe and a lighter is nothing short of miraculous. The Scottish actor's anything-goes art-house sensibility fits her auteur's vision of glamour and madness like a hand in a Gucci glove, and the duo managed to cram more humor, tension, drama, camp and lushness into 30 minutes than most films do in 90. Mainlining 10 cc's of pure, uncut cinematic bliss. Drive My Car. Japan's Ryusuke Hamaguchi returns with yet another marathon-length masterpiece, a 3-hour-plus adaptation of a Haruki Murakami short story about a theater director staging an international, multilingual production of Chekhov's Uncle Vanya in Hiroshima. The gentleman has a storied history with the play as an actor, as well as a connection to one of the cast, a tempestuous, pretty boy television star who once worked with the director's late wife. He's also been reluctantly assigned a driver by his patrons, a young woman with her own crosses to bear. Long scenes of actors pouring through a dramatic text, and how the dynamics of the work began to reflect on the dynamics of its interpreters, initially brings to mind a less paranoid version of a Jacques Rivette movie.